doing the newsreader thing. I'm just gonna talk like a human. That's okay. Hello, I am Matt. Meatball. Welcome to the stream.
Our regular contributor Brad is out today. I'm Simon. Together we are Ballpark. That's right. Every week we pick an album that came out on a Friday, give ourselves a week with it, and come back on a stream for an in-depth discussion. No scoring, no taste making. Music is not sports. Am I right?
Music is not sports. Stick around for more hot takes like that.
And if you like those hot takes, give us a follow on our socials. We'll let you know when we're going live. Cam, we got through the first stream with only some light audio and technical issues, but already tonight I appear to have borked it. I did write down here, do you think we can safely assume something is going to break? But I think I've already broken tonight.
Yeah, you've broken, I've broken, the stream broke, the volume broke, the audio broke, and I just feel broken. So it's all good.
Is that tonight? Did we have all of those issues tonight?
No, just in general, man. Pandemic 2021.
Absolutely. So before we get too far into it, I've got the all-important question for you. What are you drinking tonight?
Kopparberg. Am I allowed to say that? Swedish fruity cider. It's a bit late now, isn't it?
I mean, generally speaking, yeah, you know, if Kopparberg aren't paying for this stream, then we don't want to do that. But I don't know. I think we're going to reference a lot of brand names throughout this. My life revolves around brand names to a certain extent anyway, so it's bound to happen sooner or later.
It's because you're from the land of capitalism. Capitalist mitt.
That's definitely me. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of tech as we're going through this, but I think we should be able to get through that issue just about. Yeah, no. So I thought, you know, we're having an all-American girl that we're listening to tonight, so I'd go for the all-American beer, a bit of Budweiser.
Of course. Do you know the tag or the thing on the bottle off by heart? Because every American I've ever met knows it.
It's just King of Beers, man. Like that's all I got. Tagline. So I mean, what I will say, like I'm you know, Milwaukee, right? So it's like a Miller kind of part of the country as opposed to Budweiser, you know, Cardinals, Anheuser-Busch, all that. You know, Miller Brewery's where it's at. Yeah. So on last week's discussion, you briefly mentioned your love of Age of Empires, which is something that I simply have not been able to wrap my head around. Because I'm a kind and benevolent host, I thought I would give you a full hot minute to talk us through the big tourney that was happening on last week, which we so cruelly dragged you from.
The thing is, it's kind of over now, and everyone in the scene already knows what happened because you wait for the big reveal. So there's not much to talk about, man.
I don't know what happened. You set me up last week, just like
but
talking about thing, right? T90 make him bald. Is he bald now, or what?
He's not bald. It didn't reach 100k streams.
Okay.
Can you imagine if a game that was released in 1999 got 100k viewers in 2021? That would be insane. It got 65, which is pretty impressive, I think. Which actually blows my mind that many people are as weird as me and still interested in playing that game. But there you go. Heroin, if that means anything to you.
It means nothing to me, but again, for our wonderful listeners, I'm sure.
It will mean nothing to them.
I'm gonna watch what I say very carefully. It might mean something. Hey man, look, you know, like I just want to give you the soapbox. I want to give you the platform. I want to make sure that, you know, you've got your chance to preach. You've got your chance to convert. That's something I know about that game, actually. Preaching.
Wallalo. Wallalo. Did we just join Wallalo, man? You can't do that. You can't convert a monk, so...
Okay. Cool.
It's not allowed, right? Anyway, move on.
Well, I did have I tell you what, I don't want to move on too far because I had a look at the run order beforehand. And I'm actually quite keen to continue with Cam's story time as a result of that. Because I've got a note just here that says Cam's murder mystery story.
Oh boy. I've had quite a week, man. First off, I want to give a shout out to Janet Snakehole for submitting her PhD today. Go, Janet.
Well
yeah,
done.
man.
Well done.
Yeah.
Lots of snake juice. Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had a great call with two old buddies of mine, Nathaniel Chairs, and I've forgotten what he wanted me to call him, but you know who. Yura. Slimy Dog, that's his name, Slimy Dog.
Yeah,
I had a great catch up with them. So my week was going really nicely, man. Everything was going right. Until last night, we get a knock at the door. 9 p.m. You don't expect many knocks at the door at 9 p.m. unless you've ordered food. None of us had. And it's the girls from next door, man.
Okay.
And we're there like, what's going on? We've never spoken to them before. And they're like, the woman behind, her balcony door's been open for 4 days.
Ooh.
And the light's been on and there's been no movement. And we were like, oh, okay. So we went into full murder mystery mode, man. We were all stood in the kitchen because her balcony is like opposite our balcony. Just staring into this open kitchen like, oh no, what's happened here? Like, you know, you immediately go to the worst thing, and then one of us noticed all her fridge magnets had disappeared, and all the wine on top of the fridge had gone, and we were like, this is weird, man. I went full Hercule Poirot. You know, I went for it. I was like, I was
Swirl
ready
up
to.
the ends of your mustache.
Oh, dude, I was there like.
Stick on your best fake French accent.
I got my vape pipe out and everything, you know. Isn't he Belgian, by the way?
Oh boy. Okay, maybe. I
Anyway, right.
I don't know. I mean, my grandparents watched a lot of Poirot, but it wasn't something that ever necessarily grabbed me.
No, me neither.
And
but...
I'd stopped myself from saying something that I shouldn't have said, so I shouldn't now then go on to say it. So please.
But anyway, so we're all there, and this went on for about half an hour, and Janet Snakehole has her phone number. So we text her, we don't get a respond, and like an hour and a half passes, and we're like, okay, something's up. We've got, like, there's a gap between our thing where I can climb on the roof and climb into her balcony, and I was fully there, and we were like, oh no, what's happened? When she just walks into the kitchen, just in full sight, and we're like, hello? She's like, oh yeah, what's up? And she come up with the most intricate story for why her door had been open for 4 days. Like, her boiler was being replaced and they were redecorating, which is why all the fridge magnets are gone. But you would never go there, so we were fully prepared for there to be like some deep mystery there. But it just turned out like, you know, boiler troubles, which is far less exciting. But
you
still,
cracked the case.
I did crack the case, and now I'm ready to move on to my next one.
I will just say before you move on, though, I have been watching a lot of, over the last couple of weeks, What We Do in the Shadows, the TV series.
Is that the vampire documentary?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so the TV series spun off from the movie. The movie is my wife's favorite. It's like constantly on. I think it's great. I just don't tend to watch movies more than like once or twice, so I don't join in with the like daily watchings. The TV series is fantastic. A lot of that is probably down to Matt Berry being in it, and Matt Berry, I don't think is ever actually acting, but is very, very good at what he does. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, you could have a vampire kind of situation on your hands. You said it was last night. Was it dark out? Like,
yeah, we didn't see her in the day.
Like,
but I don't know. Are vampires like allergic to fridge magnets? I thought it was garlic.
You were hypnotized for that part, right? I like, she very poorly hypnotized you.
Right.
So, you know, did it in a rush or something like that. So it didn't get the chance to imprint in your brain that there should be fridge magnets there.
Yeah, I mean, we could always go with the Occam razor approach, and she was just having her boilers fixed. But I'm happy to go with vampires and hypnotism.
Way too simple for me. Way too simple.
Yeah. Do you know what, though? It did get me thinking. The fact that we noticed that the fridge magnets are gone and the wine had gone from the top of the fridge. Yeah, I could do this for a living, you know. I don't know if Ballpark should be about music. I think it might need to be about detective work. Ballpark Detective Agency. We'll get it in the ballpark.
And we did talk about last week, and you know, we saw what we did with the recorded version of this, right? So if you're watching us live right now, we do put a recorded version of this stream up on a Sunday on YouTube. And we just went, like, it was the first time I had put a video on YouTube, right? And we went down the full, like, thing. You had a cat in it. We did a clickbait title. We did a clickbait thumbnail and everything, and it worked. So I guess if we follow along what you do on the internet, like, true crime is very popular. A true crime podcast or something, us just whispering into the mics about, mysterious things that happen. So yeah, Ballpark Investigates could be on, man.
Isn't that a little too close to home for you, though? Because every serial killer in the world is from Wisconsin.
Making a Murderer was it wasn't a hard watch. It was just a very familiar watch. It's like every time it's like, oh, hey, I know that place. Yeah, no, all right.
Yeah, Wisconsin, man. You always tell me it's the greatest place on earth, but it has a ridiculous amount of serial killers to general populace ratio that I don't think exists anywhere else in the world.
It's just not a whole lot going on,
Something about working in cheese factories just sends you to the edge, man.
I don't mean to actually but, not even the biggest producer of cheese anymore. It's cranberry farmers. That's who you got to look out for. Wisconsin, the USA's leading producer of cranberries. We stole that from California after they stole cheese from us.
When are the Packers changing to the cranberry heads then? So those stupid foam cheese heads that you'll wear.
You don't want to fight on stream, do you?
I'm sorry. They're very cool and they're not at all weird.
Get on to your next story before I get you onto it.
That's it. I don't have any more stories.
You said you had another story, didn't you? You said, because I held you back to talk about vampires.
No. I was just saying I should move on in general to more murder mysteries. I don't have any more. Nothing else has happened to me this week.
I mean, it's a big thing to happen,
Yeah, it's true. I did break the Banquet Records algorithm, which was quite a nice achievement. So now everybody that buys any metal records from Banquet is going to get a Julian Baker recommendation, which I think is pretty great. And everyone should listen to Julian Baker anyway. So that was the other...
breaking the system from the inside. I love it.
Exactly. That was the other big thing that happened this week. So yeah, all good, man.
So something I wanted to run through from my side real quick. Obviously, we were talking about the Slope album Street Heat last week, which was, I don't think I'm putting any words in your mouth to say we really enjoyed that. But it gave me a hell of a taste for hardcore this week, which was really unfortunate timing considering that the album we'll be talking about is pretty much the polar opposite to hardcore. But so I did, in between listenings to the album we'll be talking about shortly, I actually ended up listening to a bunch of Comeback Kid, which I don't do enough of regularly because Wake the Dead is just such an incredible song that is like one that I always forget about. Right? It's like one of those you put it on and it's just like, this could totally, if I remembered this song existed like every day, then this would be one of my favorite songs, but I just forget about it for whatever reason. So I was listening to a bunch of Comeback Kid and I jumped on their socials, which reminded me about something else that I had completely forgotten about over the last year, and that's Slam Dunk Festival. So Slam Dunk's lineup last year was like totally insane. It was something that I looked at and is just, this is perfection. Of course, that didn't end up going ahead thanks to the old Corona. But now the festival this year has moved from its usual May slot to a September slot to try and make sure that they can get something going. A little bit of confidence, a little bit of breathing room. But I think most importantly, they have brought back an absolutely killer lineup. It is really rare that I look at a festival and I can go down line by line and see something every single spot. Just like, yeah, no, I go and see that, go and see that, go and see that. I mean, we're talking about Sum 41, Pennywise, Story So Far, 4 Years Strong, Your Demise, Zebraheads, the aforementioned Comeback Kid, Chunk No Captain Chunk, Hacktivist, Wargasm. I could keep going on and on. But I thought this might be a really good way of illustrating some of the things we were talking about yesterday, and I think your face is giving it away a little bit here. What was interesting to me is if you were to pull up that lineup, right? Or at least just take from what I have said there. Is that a festival you would ever consider going to?
Absolutely not.
No?
You listed a bunch of bands there that I think if I was at a festival already and I had a really significant gap, I might consider like checking 15 minutes of their set. Like
Okay.
I'd probably go see Sum 41 just for her fat lip, and it's that kind of vibe for me. But I really fell off pop punk and that that vibe a long time ago. Not always. There's still some great stuff out there. I'm a huge Jeff Rosen. I said socks then because I'm wearing my Jeff Rosen socks right now. But I'm a huge Jeff Rosenstock fan, and he kind of flirts with that genre. But yeah, I mean, it's weird in a way how much our music, the music we like, melds in the middle, but in some ways how very different we are.
And thank you for using that as an opportunity to illustrate exactly what I was hoping to illustrate just by talking through that. Because, like, honestly, it looks so good. I wanted to go so badly last year, and obviously it ended up getting canceled, so didn't do that. But certainly something I will be looking at this time around.
Let's be fair. You only want to go because there's a dedicated ska stage.
It's part of the reason. I would spend a lot of time on that stage. I would spend a lot of time there. Yeah, so I think it is probably a good time for us to move on and start talking about tonight's album. If I just make sure this all works out correctly, then you should be able to see on the screen there that tonight we are talking about Lana Del Rey's 7th studio album, Chemtrails, over the Country Club. Taking a look at the press blurb, so this came out on Polydor Records over here in the UK, which is part of UMG. It was Interscope over in the US. Following the success of her 2019 Grammy, in black caps with a trademark after it, nominated album Norman fucking Rockwell, Lana Del Rey today releases her highly anticipated 7th studio album, Chemtrails, over the Country Club. The album, which consists of 11 songs, is co-written by Lana and Jack Antonoff. It includes a cover rendition of Joni Mitchell's classic For Free, featuring singers Zellade and Weyes Blood, along with a feature from Nikki Lane on the track Breaking Up Slowly. Lana also released her music visual for the song White Dress, directed by Constellation Jones and inspired by famed director David Lynch. The song is the third release from the new album, following the title track Chemtrails over the Country Club and Let Me Love You Like a Woman. Album is available now for download on streaming platforms and is available on various vinyl formats and found here. I did find out when I was doing this that if you take one of these releases from a bigger label, they're a lot less fun than taking it from a band releasing their debut. So that album did come out on Friday. It was delayed from its original release date in September 2020, thanks to some issues with production of the vinyl versions. One track didn't actually survive that delay. It was called Dealer, that ended up getting cut. And as that release didn't have any quotes from Lana herself, I went ahead and grabbed this from her September 2020 sit down with Interview Magazine, where Del Rey stated that, quote, so much of the album pertains to her, quote, stunning girlfriends and beautiful siblings.
Oh yeah, you can hear that big time. big time. I'm a huge Weyes Blood fan, and I knew they'd been doing some stuff together. There was some footage a while back of them doing like a live song together. It was actually the Joni Mitchell song they recorded for this album. And you can hear the I think Lana Del Rey spent the last year listening to Titanic Rising, which is the last Weyes Blood album, because it shares a lot of the same, not sound, but feel and characteristics that Natalie brought to that Weyes Blood album.
So I just want to try and frame this discussion from my perspective a little bit here. So let's jump back to 2012. I'm at uni. I've got my mohawk. I'm knee deep in punk and ska. I like up-tempo music. I like it distorted. I like it full of ois. If it doesn't have any of those things, I'm generally not interested, right? So Lana Del Rey's debut album, Born to Die, came out that year, catapulted her to global superstardom, and Summertime Sadness is being played like absolutely everywhere, right? I listened to the track and I was pretty unimpressed with it. It was like, for me, again, at that time, quite slow, quite drony, a bit bland, and just like listen to it once, no, not interested. And around the same time, there were all those stories going around. I don't know if you remember it. They were really prevalent about her being like a very manufactured pop star, like thrown together by the industry as their next vehicle to prize cash from the great unwashed. And I think between those things, I became really quite dismissive of her and her music, and really didn't pay very much attention since. I've since tried to broaden my horizons a lot and realized that my initial reaction was quite unfair. She's clearly incredibly talented as a musician. And as part of this this process that we went through this week, I went back and listened to a few songs from her back catalog. Like, how can I argue with a song that's titled Diet Mountain Dew? That's great. And yeah, so I could see from that her sound has developed considerably since I last paid any attention. You've got a couple more touch points for her, right?
I always kind of liked Summertime Sadness. I would never have admitted that in 2012, but over the years, and had stopped caring about things like that are particularly dumb. Have always liked that track, but didn't really have any interaction with her until she released Norman fucking Rockwell.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through a phase over about a year where I tried to listen to everything that was released. So I think it was 2019. I listened to over 500 albums, and
yes.
Norman fucking Rockwell was released that year. So I listened to it quite a lot, and I really, really liked it. I was quite surprised that she had that kind of songwriter depth to her. Yeah, and that's really where my kind of I wouldn't call myself a huge fan or anything, but where my appreciation for her music came from. I'm already a big fan of that style anyway, always have been. And I mean, I can name you sort of 5 albums that have come out in the last 5 years that share these kind of, they don't sound similar in any way, they're not the same genre, but they share these like characteristics. Even, going way back to, the 70s, there's Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, Clear, crossovers there. Even touch points of like Elliott Smith for me, who I have a couple of records of, quite enjoy, but that's one of Janet Snakehole's favorite artists. So you can just see all of this stuff coming into it. And it's not the greatest out of all of those things by any means, but it fits really nicely within them.
See, I think this is, probably again an area that I'm less familiar with in general. And it's interesting, actually. I think if you're good for us to move on to the track by track, one of the first things that I thought about when listening to White Dress was actually my understanding of what Lana Del Rey's music was maybe didn't line up with what I was hearing. And it was a pleasant enough surprise there, straight away on that first track.
So what I will say before we get onto the first track, just slightly, is this album in particular, and she has always been about these great narratives. She really likes to tell these like deep and grandiose kind of stories laced heavily with Americana. Her last album was called Norman Rockwell, for example. So you get these themes. They're all sort of 50s. They're all very retro in theme, and you get, like I said before, you get classic influences in there mixed with more contemporary ones, which she even name drops on this record. And you can tell, I don't know if you watched the 2 videos to this album, but the aesthetic is all within them. There's the White Dress one, where she's sort of skating around, and it's this very classic, when I was a waitress, but she's doing the 50s rollerblading waitress kind of thing. And then the other one, she's again just covered in 50s sort of glam. The difference between this album and other ones is that this one's personal to her, I think. It felt very much about her relationship with fame and her youth wrapped up in these narratives, which made it quite hard to unwrap in a way, in a week anyway. Yeah, and then starting with White Dress. So, like I said, you've got these kind of strained vocals at the start for me. They're really strange. She feels like she's right on the edge of what she can do as a vocalist. And then when you combine that with the lyrics, this is what I'm sort of starting to say, where it feels more personal almost immediately. It kind of feels like she was deliberately trying to word paint there and say that she felt coerced by the industry into releasing that music. Kind of what you were saying earlier, that she was a industry shill, when she was really listening to the White Stripes, or et cetera, et cetera. And that's really the big takeaway from this opening track for me. Forget the sort of really soft slide guitar or the brush drums or the really soft piano. That was the biggest, clearest indication of what this album was going to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wrote down here the way the album, the song closes out, right? You've got that great bit of writing. It kind of makes me feel like maybe I was better off because it made me feel like a god. That to me is where, that narrative, that strong narrative, which does run through this a lot, right, is set up. And, it happens with the music as well. You've got the gorgeous full piano melodies, Lana's soft but evidently powerful vocals over the top at the beginning there. It felt so much more intimate. So again, these preconceived notions that I got about her work, I thought I was going to get something that was like super overproduced pop, but you're just sitting down next to Lana at the piano to begin with. And that to me is probably where a lot of my favorite moments on the album end up being. I know those strained vocals there, like it really seemed to be accentuated out by, there was sort of some whispering backing vocals there. I kind of found that grating a little bit. I didn't enjoy the bits of the vocal that was helping bring out. But I can see what you're saying about, that trying to bring that pain through, and where it's used, the lines talking about about the music industry quite plainly. It makes a lot of sense.
It's not just that, but I can't remember the exact line. I probably should have written this down, but the one where she's talking about the men in the music industry, and you can tell from the meter of that, it's just very rushed into one line. She felt rushed all into it, and then the song starts to speed up as she's getting closer to fame, and then she starts reminiscing back away from fame, and it slows down. I actually will say that between her and Jack Antonoff of Taylor Swift and Lord fame, it really is just a masterclass in songwriting from that perspective, in terms of trying to tell a narrative through music, because it always takes a backseat to Lana on this album, and just little things like that really help tell the story in ways that you might not even notice on first listen unless you're really looking for them. But yeah, really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and all of those themes are set up here, right? You've got Summers, romance, diners, jazz on the lawn, White Stripes, Kings of Leon, music business more generally. Like, all of these things are things that you come back to later on. What I did like as well, you had a little bit of bluegrass kind of sneaking in too, which does appear in places. As a quick aside before we move on, right? 1 minute 30 mark-ish. Did you hear what I heard?
I don't know. What did you hear?
Did Lana just rip a fat vape? Sitting at the piano? It's like this noise. It's this exact noise. Like,
I'm gonna have to listen back to that now, and I get the feeling
crackle. Like,
yeah, professional recording industry here with their fat vapes in the background. You'd hope someone would get that in the edit, unless it was deliberate. Although, having said that,
it was really prominent to the point that it felt like something that was like on purpose. In the same way that you get I don't know why the only example of this I can think of is Machine Gun Kelly, but it's probably the most recent thing that I've heard. But, like just lighting up a cigarette at the start of a song and you just hear like lighter flick. It wasn't like that. It was more of just like a firing up, and it was totally probably something else. But my mind just went like, "Yep, nope."
There is this whole this kind of thing with Lana Del Rey and her fans, I think, where they're kind of seen as these like Vogue smokers. It was a bit of a meme a few years ago, so it might be a nod to that. Can't say for definite because I didn't hear it, but it might be a nod to that.
I swear it's like 1 minute 33 on this song. When we're done with this,
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it.
I'm gonna stick around on a call, and I want to know if you think that it is also for ripping Cafe.
Sounds like bonus footage there.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Right. So Chemtrails Over the Country Club, and yeah. So on my first listen to this album, after we decided to make it this week's discussion, I got about halfway through this track and I sent you a message saying like she quite clearly enjoyed Taylor Swift's Folklore from last year, as I was getting really similar vibes to that. That is an album that I really enjoy. It's one that I went back to this week after listening to this and just reconfirmed, yeah, no, that's fantastic. You really quite rightly corrected me and said that the dynamic there is the other way around. I hadn't quite realized Lana's effect on modern pop and sort of the influence on other artists, right?
I'm gonna blow your mind right now.
Oh shit!
Do you know who produced this album? Is a guy called Jack Antonoff, who is he did Norman fucking Rockwell. He did Melodrama with Lorde, and he did Folklore and the other Taylor Swift album, Evermore, or I can't remember exactly what it's called. Yeah. So he's done the last two Lana records now, Folklore and all these other ones. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a lot of crossover between the two. But I think, yeah, I mean, Lana Del Rey kind of has a lot to answer for in terms of her and Phoebe Bridgers are really shaping a lot of what comes out of this scene. I mean, when Folklore came out, it was, Taylor Swift doing Phoebe Bridgers was what the narrative was. I couldn't hear it personally myself. I think they've got quite different styles, but I think people unfamiliar with kind of softer, acoustic or, acoustic indie or acoustic pop or whatever would hear them and think, oh, that's exactly the same. I don't think so, but I can see, maybe where there would be some crossover. But yeah, so I think it's Jack Antonoff all over it, and it's Lana capturing the zeitgeist of the moment that she helped create. In a big way.
And again, I think that was, probably the element that switched around for me when I was listening to this after you'd said that, right? And it was, thinking about some of the bits that reminded me of a few other people. Like there's even like light touches of like Billie Eilish, I think, that you can pick up in some of this. And it's then realizing that, again, it's the other way around. Like Billie Eilish hugely influenced by Lana Del Rey. I think it was even just the fact that, for me, I was thinking, I still think of Lana Del Rey as like relatively new to all this. And then it's like, no shit, like 8 years, like all of these artists breaking out that happened after that. I mean, Billie Eilish, obviously a poor example of that because, she is very recent. But on this track, though, the main hook of it, I'm on the run with you, my sweet love, there's nothing wrong, contemplating God, under the chemtrails, over the country club. That's probably the part of this album that's stayed absolutely ingrained in my brain whenever it's not been playing this week. Like, that is just, I wake up in the morning, I start thinking about my day, and then music starts playing in my head, and it's been that more often than not. Very pleasant. Very, very pleasant.
It's funny, actually. I kind of, when I heard the title, I was like, it's the most Lana Del Rey title I've ever heard. It could only be an album released by her. But then when you hear that line in particular and the references to her being wild throughout the album and all this controversy, it makes sense to have a reference to something like a conspiracy theory, like a chemtrail, to kind of bring back to her, because she kind of occupies that place a lot of the time in memes, in popular culture and things like that. People kind of see her as that figure. So it's interesting to to look at it from that way. I'm not sure if that's exactly what she meant. I think she could have also meant that she is this kind of wild, controversial figure in the music industry as well, and it's another fame link. But yeah, there's that's what I mean. This album's so wrapped up in so many different things. It's really difficult to tell, which made it such an interesting listen for me.
So I had completely forgotten. It was only when I was looking up the press release and saw the photos that accompanied it. I had completely forgotten about that whole like mesh face mask thing that happened with her, where she was pictured out wearing like a face mask with all these gaps in it and everything. And that ended up everywhere at the time, and then I didn't realize that there was like an apology after, or not an apology, but like a clarification afterwards, where it's just like, no, like it had something underneath, like I'm not that stupid. But I thought it was just really, really brazen of her to then take that and wear that in some of the album photo shoots too, right? I was like, hey, it's that face mask, I forgot about that, and then see everything afterwards there. But yeah, no, certainly somebody who's courted some controversy, I think, even over the last couple of years or so, for somebody who is not not an avid follower of what's going on sort of within celebrity culture more generally. I thought the line, white picket chemtrails over the country club, does a really good job of summing up the duality of this song. So much of this song reflects back to like quite an atypical small town America scene. Very suburban, but still upmarket. You've got the yearning for simplicity, washing my hair, doing the laundry, late night TV, I want you only. But it's offset against some fairly grandiose imagery. Obviously, country club being what a country club is in the U.S. Actually, I'm going to pause there and say as well, I meant to mention when I was having my drink earlier, I really wanted to see if I could find a martini in a can or something, because the fuck am I actually going to make up a martini for during this, but just in honor of the great Jessica Walter. But back to the album here. You've got that grandiose imagery of wearing jewels in the swimming pool. It's a lot going on quite early here. It's taking some of those perceptions and smashing them, and doing something a little bit different.
It's like I was saying at the beginning, it's the first time she's done this grand narrative, this kind of big story, and it's been really obviously personal to her. Like earlier on in the last song, White Dress, we were in the early trappings of her just getting famous, when she's first breaking into the industry. We're much deeper at this point, and she's yearning for that past life. She's got this, white dress on. She's in the country club. She's made it. She's part of the scene, but she also doesn't feel a part of the scene. And it's quite interesting to see it from that perspective. Not obviously one that either of us would understand particularly, or I think most people listening to the album, but one interesting to hear from an outsider looking in at something like that.
You've got the very clear sort of indication that a lot of it is predetermined, or, at the very least, she is completely powerless to do anything about that. There's some of that astrology and star signs language there. I think flags quite heavily towards that.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And I think with the next track as well, with Tulsa Jesus Freak, I kind of really started to notice how much religious allegory was being intertwined and laced throughout this as well, just adding that other layer where I couldn't quite tell whether she was sort of feeling distant from a religious upbringing or something like that. I don't know too much about her upbringing, so I don't know if that is the case, or whether fame is more like a religious experience for her, in the, she sees it as this kind of big, unanswered question kind of thing. It was really hard to tell, to be honest with you, because it was quite abstract in where it was used and how it was used.
This is good, man. Like last week we were sitting here and we were talking about funk and hardcore mixing together, and we were sitting there saying, hey, I don't know what any of the words they're saying are. And this week, we're sitting here having quite an in-depth discussion about the lyrics. And I think when it comes to that religious imagery in this song, and again throughout this album, right? It probably comes back to, for me, I saw it very much as it's a good vehicle for small town America, right? Every town's got a church. Everywhere, everybody in the town is going to be going to church. It's like a staple of that community, and it's something that you see sort of at the center of everything. On this song, I'm going to say, and this is something that creeps in a little more throughout the album, there were a few little niggles that pulled me out of this. I'm going to end up talking, I think, throughout this a lot about the return to small town America theme that appears throughout. It's something that I personally relate with quite closely. I grew up in a small rural town in the Midwest, and even though I am 4,000 miles across an ocean right now, I still think of Wisconsin as home. So it was something that I often romanticize myself. And even though it may not have been Lana's intention when writing this album, I am picking out so much about that when I'm listening through, because it's the thing that I am relating to here. And again, it was just like, okay, cool. Like I'm relating to something in a Lana Del Rey album. I didn't expect this before this week. It feels eminently familiar. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is just, I think my criticisms here are probably a lot more about me and how I've perceived her writing rather than her execution of it throughout this. Considering everything that I mentioned off the top of this about my notions about Lana Del Rey, I can't now be sitting here 3 tracks into this album demanding that she writes an album for me, right? That's not how music works, full stop, but it's certainly not how this album's going to work. But there was a really clear example of this in this song, right? It's her pronunciation of Arkansas.
See, I would never have picked this up until you mentioned it. I did notice there was something weird about it, but we had a conversation earlier. You said that's a New York thing, right?
No. So, do you remember I sent you a video a couple of weeks ago?
Why Arkansas?
Yeah. America Explained.
Yeah.
It just immediately sort of comes to mind here, and it feels quite contrived. Combine it with the heavy, sort of noticeable auto-tune in sections of this song, which is very clearly a stylistic choice, and that effect to me was just multiplied in the wrong way.
So for me, I think the thing that I've written down about the auto-tune, because it is so obvious in this song, is that to me it felt like they used that in order to not just make this album classic pastiche. We're not just trying to do a straight 1-for-1 Fleetwood Mac album, or a straight 1-for-1 Joan Baez album, or a Joni Mitchell album, or any of these great artists from the past that you can name. And by adding these modern contemporary things in, you're kind of framing Lana within that influence, but with these new techniques, with this new style, really making it her own thing. And saying, look, okay, I love this, but I'm still going to do these things, even though they wouldn't have used it. So that's kind of where I saw the auto-tune coming in. As for the small town stuff, I can't really speak to that because I'm not from a small town in America, or have ever even been to a small town in America, because I've only ever been to New York and Chicago. Shout out to the Chicago Cubs. But I don't know if it necessarily felt inauthentic. To me, it felt quite authentic, because she, although being from New York, I think she's from a small part of New York, from what I was reading, Lake Placid. So it felt like she did have that experience, and she was sort of relating to that, and everything that came with that. And she was maybe sort of looking at it again. We're going back to the fame thing here, where she's famous now, and she's stuck out in LA or somewhere. I don't know where she is, probably LA.
Yeah, you're right.
And is kind of yearning for that thing, and that's why she keeps going back to it, because I get the feeling she didn't enjoy, from everything I've read, that upbringing, or like she had problems in her youth and wanted to escape that area and that town, and now she's looking back, well, like, actually, was that better? Am I happy now? That kind of thing. And it's really where we get the first mention of Candle in the Wind, which is a prominent theme throughout Lana's music.
You had a different reading of this than I did.
So, I remember when I first listened to the Norman Rockwell album, it stood out to me because it's obviously an Elton John reference. And I was like, well, okay, I'm going to go have to read about that. Going to have to find out. And I read an interview from her where she'd referenced it basically in terms of Marilyn Monroe. I think from our British perspective, immediately we jumped to Diana, obviously Princess Diana. But maybe not so much if you're in the States or in America. 1974 it came out. It was about Marilyn Monroe then. She'd referenced Marilyn Monroe in an interview saying that she didn't want to sort of go that way, but she felt like she might eventually. And you see this on this album as well later on, where she's talking about Amy Winehouse, she's talking about Tammy Wynette, and the sort of how this industry chewed up and spat them out. And again, it's just another layer of influence. Elton John's an influence in this and that kind of thing. So I'm thinking it's more a reference to those kind of people consistently, and how she doesn't want to feel that fragile, because that's what that song's about, right? Being fragile, candle in the wind. She doesn't want to feel that fragile. She wants to take ownership of it. And throughout this album, she keeps mentioning it because she's becoming more and less fragile as it goes on. That was my reading anyway. I don't know if that's 100% spot on, but
so yeah. I mean, I heard it as Princess Di, right? Now I don't have the context of the previous album there. I was just going off the fact that, again, you do get a fairly heavy smacky in the face, on the nose Princess Diana reference again later on in this album. I tell you what, she should have just cleared it up for us. Why just one candle? Couldn't we have 5,000 candles in the wind?
But I'm not gonna shame everyone by singing, but what a tune!
Well, no, absolutely, greatest song of our generation there. Yeah, so I mean, look, let's set those complaints aside, and something else I think just before I move on, because I will come back to this throughout, and you're right to point out about the fact that she did grow up in a small town. Don't dispute that. You do think of Lana Del Rey as somebody being quite intertwined with New York City and the Bronx, Manhattan, kind of that sort of area there. But absolutely, she did grow up there. I'm not trying to gatekeep this or anything like that, right? This was just something that I think it was my feelings on this throughout, and it's something that's going to keep coming up. Those complaints aside, though, the use of backing vocals to have a second conversation on it was the last couple of choruses, I think, on this, was really enjoyable. And combine it with the changes to the music, the drums kind of pressing in a little bit, the building synths, it's a really nice sound.
This is one of the only songs on the album to me that breaks into a significant resolution in some way. A lot of this album, and it's my one big complaint when I'm listening to it, just feels quite meddling. I get it, everything's there to support Lana and her story, but when you're trying to listen to it, it took me 3 or 4 times to be able to get through once. When I managed to get through it all once, I started to become more familiar and enjoy it more and more. But this is one of the only points where you're getting the white hot fever repetition with the backing vocals, like you said, where it actually breaks into that significant big anthemic kind of crescendo of just absolute great songwriting that you don't get anywhere else on the album, when it really feels like it's teasing you into that all the time, almost constantly. It's always very soft, very lull you along, and it never quite breaks into what you want it to be, which is very frustrating at points.
I think we'll get into this with some of the other tracks. You do get like the little bit of a sprinkle, and then it's just,
Exactly.
So on Let Me Love You Like a Woman, we are sitting back down next to the piano with Lana again on this song, which is a real good way of taking you from that quite eclectic end to the last track. I'm back in at this point. I think, off the top, this is one of my favorite songs on this album. Very heartfelt, sonically incredibly strong, and there was a lot there lyrically that I liked. The one part that I really wanted to shout out on this, you've got the couple of lines that run throughout the whole song, right? I come from a small town far away. I only mention it because I'm ready to leave LA and I want you to come. Second time that comes up, there is a need that's overlapped on top of the want in that line, I want you to come. It makes that next line, I guess I could manage if you stay, so impactful for me. I know when I'm writing, I often try to convey some desperation in my lyrics or something like that. And it usually ends up coming to when we're recording vocals. Check us out doing a vocal recording stream, which we do here on Twitch, by the way. I've got to start stressing that vocal or something similar to try and convey that desperation. But this little bit does it so much more effectively, and it really, really stuck with me. So, that was my kind of like masterclass moment on this album. I thought it was so good.
Yeah, I mean, this and many other points of the album are masterclasses in minimalism a lot of the time for me. There's nothing new in this track, I will say. The theme is consistent. Mm-hmm. It might switch to a love dynamic, but it's still very clearly about not a person and about her dynamic with fame and her youth and that kind of stuff. And the instrumentation is very similar, but it never becomes sort of a burden to the album, that it doesn't really change its form too much. It's just perfectly floating along in that way. Again, I still wanted it to break out at points, but it never felt like it was a problem on this particular track anyway for me.
So I think, moving on to Wild at Heart, that thing that you mentioned about, these little changes here, that's something that happens quite early on in this song. We go from the real soft vocals and the guitar at the beginning into a much more dynamic setting with a fuller sound and a tempo. It's done like so effectively that I feel like we've moved from sitting where we were into a small bar somewhere, and you're sitting at an open mic performance. Somebody's just rolled into town, and right at that same time, she hits three really great lines. I left Calabasas, escaped all the ashes, ran into the dark, and it made me wild, wild, wild at heart. So Calabasas, like much of California, has been plagued with wildfires with really growing frequency and intensity in recent years. And its status is a home for celebrities. So I think there's some Kardashians out there. Drake owns a house out there. It's not been able to protect it from that, right? There's some really clever work at play with, that whole running from fame thing, but at the same time running from a very real danger here. And to an extent, fame is obviously that.
Yeah, and I also think it ties into the kind of wild stuff we were talking about with her earlier. And she sort of says the line later on in this song, if they love me because I'm wild, wild at heart. And I think this is actually, as much as it's talking about running away from that life, it's a love letter to her fans and why she never would. I've written down here, this song could have been on Folklore. It really, really could have been on Folklore. There were times where I had to check what album I was listening to, because I was like, is this? Yeah, no, okay, it's Lana Del Rey. But yeah, it's that running away from fame. It's that love-hate dynamic with fame. Everything coming through, and she just finds new, because you think by we track 5, track 6 at this point in the album, yep. You think, okay, we get it, Lana, you don't like fame, or you do like fame, we can't really tell, you know what I mean, you have a love-hate thing with fame, but she always finds a new way to frame it, and this one particularly to me felt like she can't escape, or even though she would try to, like the fire sort of message that you were saying a minute ago, she wouldn't want to sort of leave the fans. She wouldn't want to like not have that relationship with her fan base kind of thing. Whether that feels authentic when you're as big as Lana Del Rey, I don't know, because I'm not sort of in the stan group, as you would as you would say. But it's certainly there, and it's certainly what she's feeling, what she's trying to express. You can really see as well with this song how much pop is kind of maturing at the moment. Into this kind of new sound. We're a long way away from the sort of early 2090s, and it's becoming this kind of it's becoming like a, I hate to say this because I was, it's always been an art form, but it's really becoming quite artistic in that way and what it's trying to do. And this song is a great example of that.
It's the simplicity, I think, that strikes me, right? If I think back to pop from, even again, that era where, her first album was coming out and, I had so much of the pop that I was so dismissive of. You think of, a lot going on, these really grand tracks. And, it's not that in most cases. And with this album, you're often not hearing more than 4 instruments at a time. There's a lot going on with the vocals, but it's really stripped back, and I think that in itself does help it feel a little more relatable. This is the song where you get that really clumsy Diana reference, though. I think that really is just like, I'm gonna smack you in the head, like cars. The camera's head flashes, they cause car crashes, and I might just be really oversensitive to this at the moment because royal news is fucking everywhere and I couldn't give 2 shits. It just felt so on the nose and it threw me off totally.
Sorry, it's so interesting that you say that because I didn't even pick up on that line as being about Diana. I just felt it about paparazzi. But now with the earlier Candle in the Wind, maybe my interpretation of that was wrong, or maybe it's like another layer to that whole kind of. I think when you add it all together, it feels less clumsy to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that line, if you took it in isolation, would feel quite on the nose.
And don't get me wrong. I think the fact that we have had this conversation about, the 2 different ways you could take Candle in the Wind, right? And it does show that I think so much of her lyric writing has got real depth to it. It's not something that is just forgotten about, it's afterthought, just trying to get something that's going to fit the melody or anything like that. It is quite clearly very considered. Yeah, I will say on a number of listens, this was usually the last point where if I wasn't really particularly paying attention, the rest of the album from this point would start to blend together from this song, and I maybe didn't really notice it was even playing until Deezer started playing something else at the end. It goes a little downhill from here from my perspective. There's still some interesting parts here and there, but on Dark But Just a Game, you've got a nice smooth groove to it, for example. You don't get that much else on the album. I can nod along to this if it's on in the background. You can't say that about many songs here.
So I think it's quite clear to me from your reaction to this song that you're not a huge Radiohead fan.
No, not really. Not really, no.
Because again, this could have been written by Tom York, performed by Lana Del Rey kind of territory here. There's huge Radiohead influence on this track. There's huge, even Massive Attack. It kind of moves from the mid-70s to the mid-90s in a big way here, which is kind of where the album actually picked up for me a little bit. Because like, oh, okay, we've had 5 or 6 tracks now doing that one thing, and all of a sudden we've got this seamless transition through the decades into this more Radiohead sound. I'm also not the biggest Radiohead fan in the world, but because of who I live with, I had to listen to a lot of Radiohead. I'm fairly familiar with their work at this point. Again, it's different in tone and aesthetic, but it still feels seamless, and the themes remain consistent. Again, we're talking about the price of fame, what this industry can do to you if you don't learn to cope with it properly. And again, just another sort of slant on this. And this is where the Amy Winehouse and other references that I know she's talked about before come into it, because she's sort of describing seeing her influences be affected by the industry and die from it as well. Which I thought was a really interesting take, because it must be quite difficult when you see people going through this up close. And obviously we only get the press view or their view, but you never think about the people that are kind of watching this in a similar industry. It'd be like if we were in an industry and we were watching people be pursued in that way, and actually targeted in that way, and had to kind of sit back and watch that happen, because what else could you really do? Kind of situation. So I found that quite an interesting slant on this album. And then again, we got the Radiohead influence, which, although isn't my favorite, brings it up a notch, makes it a bit more lively on this track anyway.
And there's another one of these shifts that maybe doesn't end up resolving itself, but going quite abruptly from that dark and moody opening to a much brighter chorus. It does make me smile when I'm listening to that. And not just because the lyrics that accompany that are, while the whole world is crazy, we're getting high in the parking lot, or making out in the parking lot. It changes to later. There's things going on here, but
I bet everyone's glad they stuck around for hot takes. Like, there's things going on.
There's things going on here.
There are things going on.
Have we got our video title now? There's things going on here.
Could be all caps.
I could read a comment that we've had in chat. Actually,
go for it.
And that comment may actually end up being the title for the video, I guess, if you let me do this in my pure chaos way, which I know you won't. Shout out to Lala Kukalala, who says witches make magnets out of vampires' spum.
Oh, what does that mean?
I'll tell you when you're older.
Okay.
So, we might be lost here, but according to Lana, not all who wander are lost. That's track 7. There's some real nice vocal performance here, good soft guitars. Not something I'd switch off if it was on, but not a great deal about this song that really started to grab me and pull me in.
No, again, we've got another sort of chapter in the story of Lana's fame, and again, she's addressing her fans because she's like talking about how she's on tour. There's the Tolkien quote in there, obviously the title of the song, Not All Who Wander Are Lost, and it's kind of this fantasy meets reality, land of fame kind of thing. I don't know if any of you other nerds out there picked up on the Tolkien reference, but I certainly did. I was surprised because it's not the place I ever expect to find Lord of the Rings references. Gandalf quotes, but Lana Del Rey album is apparently
I'm
where
terribly sorry not to be able to help you out on this one. No, I thought lockdown was going to be my opportunity to finally either read or watch Lord of the Rings, but it didn't happen. So
You've never watched Lord of the Rings?
No.
We'll have to talk about that after the stream.
I feel like
this
we've
could
talked
get a
about
bit
this
long.
before, but yeah.
The one thing I will say about this track, and it's the last point I want to really make about it, because there's not a lot to talk about, but this is really the first point in the album, other than the first track, where you can start to see the limitations she has as a vocal performer. I'm not saying she's bad in any way. She's great, absolutely phenomenal singer. But there are limitations to everyone's voice. There are things people can't do, and she's really, really pushing it in a lot of places on this album into almost a painful sounding place. And it kind of gives it this rawness to it, but it's still polished. Obviously, you've got Jack Antonoff as the producer. He's never going to let anything go out sounding less than incredible, but there's this sort of aspect to it that is less than perfect, shall we say, which is unusual in this genre. And I really started to enjoy it at this point, to be honest with you, because you don't often hear imperfection in music a lot these days, and especially with someone like Lana Del Rey, but you do hear.
So I think, the one thing I would want to talk about on this song is we've talked a lot about, some bigger elements remaining unresolved, but resolving the melody or kind of resolving the rhyme of all those who wander are lost with it's just wanderlust was really well done. Very, very, very good writing. Very good writing there.
Well done, J.R.R. Tolkien.
Indeed. So speaking of imperfections, actually, I've got a question for you about Yosemite. Did you have an issue with skipping at the start of this track?
No,
Okay.
Because I don't use Spotify because I think they're a horrible soulless corporation, and actually listened to this before I bought the digital version on a seamless playback version on YouTube that someone had created. So everything has kind of melted into each other. So I didn't get
No, it's interesting. I mean, I also don't use Spotify. I just use Deezer. Yeah, I tried it on multiple devices. I wonder if they've had a bad upload on there because there's just like a smidgen of the start of this song actually starts on track 7, and then like the first like half a second to a second of this track on there is just nothing, and then it kicks back in. It's wild.
Wouldn't be the first time someone had done that deliberately. I don't know if you've ever listened to the Low album. I can't remember. Double Negative. Can't remember what it's called. I've got it sitting over there somewhere, but it's a really great album. But the first time I ever listened to that on when I put the record on, and having never listened to the album, stupidly, it has this like 3-minute skip, and I was like, oh, great, my record's broken. Turns out it's just a part of the song. So people do throw that kind of thing in there for.
Which is why I asked, right? You know,
yeah.
I did want to check. It's just like, is this intentional? Is this unintentional? Can I break this chat just with like bongos or drums here? That's obviously something I felt was important enough just to note down. I don't think it's actually bongos, but it's some nice drums played with hands there. That's running throughout this track. What more have we got with this one that we haven't had elsewhere?
This one felt like the love letter to Joni Mitchell more so than anything else, other than the Joni Mitchell cover she does at the end of the album.
And shout out for her on the track before.
Yeah, but this one was everything in style. You got those bright, open, plucked guitar chords at the beginning, the way she delivers the vocal. I don't know if you're that familiar with Joni Mitchell's work, but in sort of every aspect of it, it was very Joni Mitchell, and that's kind of the big takeaway from this. This kind of felt a little bit disappointing. I still enjoyed the track, but it felt a little bit disappointing because I felt like she'd gone to such lengths to avoid these kind of almost covers earlier in the album to do just a straight up one-for-one kind of version of a Joni Mitchell song, or not an actual Joni Mitchell song, but an influenced by Joni Mitchell song. Really, really didn't sit right. I felt like, okay, be influenced by it, but still put your own spin on it, and it didn't really feel like she did here. It's still very simple and quite beautiful in a lot of ways, but it felt disappointing in that way.
The chorus melody has got some, like you say, some really simple notes just added to it that lift it up in a fantastic way. But I'm starting to find some of these little bits here and there just less satisfying, I think, throughout. It's a nice song, not something I can fault, but this runs to 5 minutes. It's the longest one on the album, I'm pretty sure. And I just kept wanting this song to finish so I could get some Nikki Lane, actually, to be honest.
So the one other thing I'll say about this song is it's the second instance of Candle in the Wind in this album.
Yes,
obviously,
you're right. Yeah.
Third overall that I can remember that Lana's referenced. And I really felt like this song was sort of dedicated to the two women that famously burned out under this media spotlight and this brutal kind of microscope of fame and the unfair treatment generally of women in media, especially in those sort of positions. And I'm kind of starting to feel like maybe I'm losing the metaphor at this point, just purely because I haven't had those experiences myself. I'm not a woman. I'm not famous, and I don't understand that perspective. So I'm just wondering if it's simply as simple as that, or if it's just something else I'm missing. But it didn't I didn't feel immediately connected to it, possibly because of that.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, it's something that, as much as you make some of these historic references, I think she's been quite vocal about a lot of this stuff on Instagram as well, from like the very light amount of research that I did about her beforehand, because there appeared to be a lot of accusations about her not being so much of a feminist in the past, but that has resolved and has become quite a strong voice and something that's needed. I mean, like literally, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but you've got another Britney Spears story in the media right now. I caught myself wondering what happened to Amanda Bynes the other day, and it's still rife, not just in the music industry, beyond. Moving
Difficult
on.
subject for us to talk about,
Yeah,
obviously, being who we are, but one that I feel like is worth mentioning. Just
no doubt.
because it's obviously a prominent theme on this album. And maybe we're not the right people to address it, but we certainly shouldn't ignore it.
No, yeah,
because it's
for sure.
there and it's happening. So
For sure, no doubt. So I think moving on to Breaking Up Slowly. So I will say, I started falling off the second half of the album, but this is where it kind of picks up a little more again for me. This is, absolutely my favorite song of the last half of this album. I hadn't come across Nikki Lane before, had you?
no, actually never had. Obviously, as mentioned before, huge Wise Blood fan. But Nikki Lane is not someone I'd ever come across before.
So I am woefully uneducated on country. I think I've pointed out quite a few things that I'm uneducated on tonight. Pop music, music of kind of the 70s and 80s, J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings.
This is the perfect album for you to spend an hour and a half talking about this.
Exactly. But what I will say about country, I love it whenever I hear it. It's got, as a genre, the sort of nostalgia that I was talking about before. It reminds me of home. I went along to Black Deer Festival not last year, the year before, and that was, country, Americana, bluegrass. Just a fantastic weekend to go along to, and not really know any of the performers who were there, but listen to some fantastic music. And, the South Carolina, it's not quite a draw, but, her real distinct vocal style that is so steeped in the South cuts through the monotony of the last few songs like a knife through brisket, man. It's divine.
I actually kind of lost all of the music of this song every time I tried to listen to it because I got so lost in the Tammy Wynette reference.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was so brilliant. Obviously, Tammy Wynette of Stand By Your Man fame. This song's called Breaking Up Slowly. And she starts saying breaking up slowly is a hard thing to do. And she starts talking about Tammy Wynette's life after she wrote that song and her sort of addiction to painkillers after so many surgeries and things like that. And we're going back again to the Amy Winehouse, Whitney Houston themes where she's watching this happen to her influences in the industry. And she's almost saying that you can't stand by your man, using that as a reference to the music industry, and you have to break up slowly with it. If I didn't know Lana Del Rey was releasing another album in a couple of months, I would say that this almost felt like a goodbye, like a I can't do this anymore kind of thing. But maybe I went too deep on this one, but that's kind of what I felt. I got so lost in that kind of spider web of that one reference that I almost completely missed the other singer on it, and probably should go back and listen to for it.
Yeah, because it cut through so much for me. So I think on the services that I wasn't listening, the services I was listening on, it didn't actually mention featuring Nikki Lane. I had to go and Google afterwards. Who is this here? Because you do get that very distinct, Southern accent that you get thrown into this, and it's nice. And what's great about this song, I think, is that you could take that away from it. But for me, sitting here, I just thought it's a really good, somber, like heartbroken love song. There's some little elements in there that build up emotion in such a wonderful way. When you've got the beginning of the song, the first breaking up slowly is the right thing. It misses off that to do. And if you've listened through the song before, you're expecting that to do to come, and it doesn't. And it just swells up, and you get it with the last chorus as well. All of the swelling instruments, all of the vocals coming together, builds up wonderful emotion. I will say this is probably a place where you get that nice release, you get everything coming together, and it's a real sweet moment there. But really strong song, really strong song. And again, you can take it at the surface like I have, or you can go down and take a much deeper meaning that you have and come away from this.
Run down the Tammy Wynette route. It did really make me want to listen to that song, and it's not one I've heard for a very long time. I will say it's interesting that you took so much away from this musically, because I don't think there's anything we haven't heard before on this album. You know, from what I do sort of did take away from it, and that there's the soft guitar, the soft piano, drums only when it's absolutely necessary, and then only lightly brushed kind of thing. There's not anything changed, but I guess Nikki Lane really did it for you.
So,
and yeah.
Can we go back to talking about folklore for a second? Because I think this is probably part of this, right? You know, one thing that Taylor Swift does on folklore so well is that track with Bon Iver, right? And it cuts through, it grabs you, and it's the addition of that extra vocal that is so distinct from what you've been hearing before. And I think that's what this track does, because there's a few others on this album where I was just thinking, I need a little more something. Lana Del Rey is a fantastic vocalist. She is a great performer. But it's the extra dynamic there, I think, that, like, there are so many songs. I should have written it down when I was going through, where I was just like, I just need a little something. I need another vocalist here, whatever, to pull me through. And that happens on this track, and it's really well done.
Yeah, and I think that's like we were saying earlier. You kind of really want this album to get really grandiose to go along with the lyrics and really resolve, but I don't think you ever planned to in any way. Yeah. And I have no problem with that per se, but it really felt like it should have at some point. And I think I didn't even really feel that on this track. It wasn't until the next track, Dance Until We Die, where I actually felt that there was some sort of resolution, but then again, it's so brief that you kind of don't really get that full thing.
I'm going to end up showing my hand a little bit. I mean, if I haven't done already, which I think I have, about my overall thoughts for this album, but you know, it's so clear here that we're winding down. And you do have that moment in this song. The frustrating thing for me is that because we had that stretch of songs where I just felt quite burnt out on some of this, it ends up feeling a little bit unearned, just from where I was sitting. And you know, there's the faint sax in there, which is something new. You know, there's that real nice section where, again, I haven't written down the lyrics here, which is frustrating. But you know, if I hadn't been burnt out, I think there, I might have come to it with just a little more goodwill, I guess.
See, you really got here. You've got Lana trying to stand on the shoulders of everyone she's been influenced by. So you've got that intro where it's very Joan Baezzy, who we keep returning to, and Joni Mitchell and all those great songwriters from the late 60s, early 70s kind of period. But then you've got this transition into this Fleetwood Mac interlude. And it's the only way I can describe it, because it sounds like it was taken straight from a Fleetwood Mac song.
Yeah.
Not one that exists, but you know what I'm kind of saying with that. And then it goes back into the folksy sound like way too quickly for me. And I almost felt like this was the moment to just absolutely break into this huge wall of sound. Whether it was earned or unearned or whatever, this was the moment to do it, to have this huge crescendo to end the album on before you go into the Joni Mitchell cover. But it just sort of never does. Yeah. And it's the one sort of thing that where this is, it's the one thing this album falls flat on for me. I loved it in every other aspect apart from that one, where I just wanted it to lift itself up a bit more. In the same way that Norman Rockwell did. Because if you listen to that album as well, they're quite similar in a lot of ways stylistically, but that one just lifts itself up so much more in so many ways than this one does. And this one kind of feels like a B-side to that album in a way. because of it, which is a shame because it's so sort of intricate in a lot of
Yeah.
other ways. It just needs those little moments to pick itself up to elevate it to that level. Yeah, never does.
So we do get the line in this song. I've been covering Joni, and it's a good way to introduce the last song on this album for free, which is a Joni Mitchell cover. So I think you've talked a lot about Joni Mitchell throughout this. Somebody that I haven't had a whole lot of contact with before. Neither the featuring artists on this, you got Zelade and sorry, you said it to me like 6 times. I knew I was going to mispronounce it at the beginning, and then you followed up and saved me, and I've already forgotten how you were saying it.
I will just say you might be pronouncing it correctly. I've never heard anyone else say it. So I say Wise Blood. Wise, but I don't know whether it's correct or not.
Let's go with Wise Blood, yeah.
I've written one note on this song, and it's just Wise Blood, Natalie, and then the little emoji with the heart for eyes. Because what you were saying about Nikki Lane in the previous track is exactly how I felt about this, and I think it's brave of Lana to pick someone like that to do a song with, because Lana's a great vocalist. Natalie is a world-class vocalist for me, on another planet to most people that have ever attempted to sing. Her song Andromeda is one of my favorites from the last 10 years. Absolutely gorgeous, and she just kind of owns this track, and it felt like it was on her album, not Lana Del Rey's album, which was odd.
You sent me Andromeda last night, right? And I was upset that I either haven't listened to you talk about that before, or that you haven't talked about that song with me before, because that was an experience there. Have you heard the original, the Joni Mitchell version of this song?
I'm not sure if I've heard this one. Joni Mitchell's one of those artists where, like, you've probably heard about 50 Joni Mitchell songs, but you won't realize they're sort of Joni Mitchell songs until you Shazam them, I guess now would be the way, or till someone tells you they're a Joni Mitchell song. So I'm not sure if I'd ever heard this one before. It felt very familiar, but I couldn't say expressly, oh yeah, I've definitely listened to this one, kind of thing. It didn't feel that far away from being sort of what Joni Mitchell would have done with the track, so I'm not sure she changed it up too much.
One key difference. So,
right.
I mean, first off, so I hadn't heard this song before. I went and checked out the original, and yes, I should make more time for Joni Mitchell, especially somebody from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, like one of the most unpronounceable places, but generally a very wonderful place. Her version of For Free, the original version of For Free, ends with a ripping jazz flute solo. It is fantastic. So good. And it's not on this version.
That sounds about right.
I was just like, come on, man. Where's the jazz flute at?
You were hoping for Ron Burgundy.
I was.
Yeah. No, I mean, I now you've said that, I'm almost 90% sure I haven't heard the Joni Mitchell version of this song, because I don't recall that, but it does sound like a very her thing to do, and just very evocative of the time in general. But yeah, the only takeaway I have from this is how much I love Wise Blood. It really is how much she can lift any song for me.
It's a good song, I think, overall to close out the album with, to be honest. I think if you look at something and you see a cover song closing off an album, you think, okay, well, actually, in this case, track 10 is probably the last song on this album, and then track 11 is, something that's been shoehorned in, is just a vanity cover or something like that. But lyrically and musically, it does fit all of these thematic elements that we have had throughout. It's something that either continues or closes out that narrative that we've had throughout there. Line about the two men in the black limousine, I think, again, it's just so clear this is about fame. This is being about carted back and forth, just being, a husk or a host or something like that to everything somebody expects of you. And it fits there, and I don't think you can say that a lot about cover songs that appear on albums sometimes. So
It made me wonder actually, because this is, I mentioned earlier that Lana had performed live with Wise Blood, and they'd done. This was actually one of the covers that they'd done together previously, a number of years ago now. I think it might have been 2019, was possibly very early 2020. So it actually got me wondering, based on when this album was supposed to be released, if she was listening to this song a lot at the time and was very influenced by this track alone to write this kind of album. And all of the ideas stemmed from this one sort of, you know how you get obsessed with a song for a little bit and then every song you try and write afterwards sounds exactly like that. I have that problem every time I listen to Siamese Dream. Every song I write afterwards sounds exactly, well, not exactly, but you know what I mean. It has that spin on it. So I kind of felt that, knowing that she'd covered it with Wise Blood before, and obviously choosing to close this of the album with the themes being so similar and it fitting so nicely, whether it worked that way around and she'd always planned to close the album with this cover.
So I think moving on and just trying to sum up the album as a whole, how would you try and round this up? What would be your overall thoughts, impressions you take away here?
It's a really strong narrative. It's unique to spin the same theme over and over again, but from just about every conceivable viewpoint you possibly could. It doesn't ever really feel that repetitive in that way, although it's always talking about, from my perspective, or what I took away from it anyway, fame, her youth, and her relationship with those two things. But there's so many unique ways she does that. It's got Jack Antonoff all over it. Again, going back to the folklore thing, the melodrama thing, and the Norman Rockwell thing. You can hear his influence on her songwriting. You can hear her songwriting in it, and it all ties together really nicely. I think the one thing I wish is it just lifted itself up on maybe a track or two. That's it, really.
It is, for me, I think this album is a very long, slow burn that to me just ends up letting off a bottle rocket at the end of it rather than the big firework display that I want to see over the cornfield. The narrative aspect I think is the strongest one. Something I didn't talk about enough, I think, in the track by track, which I should have given some credit for, is that there's almost clearly some of like her own film experience that comes through on this, right? The perspective shift, excuse me, at the start of Wild at Heart feels quite cinematic. There's some noises on Yosemite that could come straight out of a movie trailer, but I don't know. Overall, I'm not entirely convinced by this. Don't get me wrong. I think it's well done. I think the production, the songwriting, things like that are very good. I know a lot of people like yourself are really going to enjoy this. I think you enjoyed this overall, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed it.
And I stopped noting down about the vocal performance after a while, but it's because it's strong across like 90% of the album. I will say, on multiple listens, it didn't grab my interest, particularly towards the back end of the album. I was pleasantly surprised musically. I'm very glad that I listened. I'm still not sure whether I've shed all of those preconceived notions that I have about Lana, which may help explain away, I think, some of the criticisms on my part when it comes to the writing or why it didn't really gel with me. I can't say that this is an album that would end up in my rotation. How about you?
If the question is regular rotation, for me, I don't think it'd be regular. I wouldn't listen to it daily, but it'll have a time and a place. It's a soft walk through a meadow.
Yeah.
It's For me, it feels like that kind of thing. It's for when you're feeling sad and you just want to feel sad with some music. My go-to is normally always Julian Baker when I want music to make me very upset. But this could be a nice addition to that kind of thing. So we'll make it into a rotation. I don't know about my regular one.
Yeah, it's funny actually because I think of this as quite nice background music. If someone were to put it on in the background, like probably on vinyl, right, during a conversation between friends, I wouldn't turn it off. I don't think I'd be the one putting it on in the first place, though, at any point. What I will say, and what is probably my biggest takeaway from this album, is that I would give Lana Del Rey a shot again, absolutely, because there is enough there, and I've gone through it enough times. I won't again. That is of interest for me. It's just more the little frustrations, little hang-ups that I've got that just.
I really think you should listen to Norman fucking Rockwell because it is everything that this album is lacking. They're very similar, but it does have those elements. Yeah. Sorry, someone's just walking behind me and I didn't realize.
It's all right. No worries. So yeah, I think just moving on a little bit here. Do we want to talk about next week? I know we looked at.
You were supposed to send me a list.
I sent you a list. You reacted to the list.
Wait, did you send me a list and I went and looked at the running order again?
I think so. I sent you a list and you said, by the way, I can't open this. I need to search and find it, but don't worry about it. I sent you the list.
I thought it was the running order.
Work. You said great work.
I thought it was the running order.
Oh,
that's why I looked
boy.
At.
Oh,
should I get the list up? What was on the list? Go through with me.
I'll open this up right here for you, and we can talk through. So I think we both agreed that. Again, I'm very glad that we went through this process of listening to this album. I'm really excited to listen to more pop. And so many other things that I haven't got as many touch points on. I think throughout this, I'm so looking forward to that throughout this process. We maybe both said that we wanted a little bit of guitar or something. I think next week to keep it
something a little less lyric heavy because I am not the deepest thinker about lyrics.
Don't mind
so something a little bit more shreddy maybe.
Okay. So I don't know which point to begin on this now that you've said that. I'm just going to run through it as I've written it down top to bottom here.
Go.
I've got two sections. This is driven by the place that I look this stuff up. And I think that the way that they define genre is very much like you're back at HMV, looking through the CD sections. So on rock, coming out today. So again, these are all albums that have come out today. We'll spend next week listening to them. We'll come back on the stream next week and have a discussion just like we have tonight. That's the number 4, Lovers by Death from Above, 1979.
So the band, the 1979.
Death from Above, 1979.
Got you. Okay.
Tonic Immobility, Tomahawk. The Devil in Me by Susie Quattro. Give One, Take One by 68. Life in Your Glass World by Citizen. Then I get to the metal section.
Here we go.
We've got The Bitter Truth. That's the brand new Evanescence album, which came out today. We have got Dream Weapon by Genghis Tron. I'm sure I've heard of Genghis Tron before. I'm sure I have.
Not familiar with them.
You have got Lamb of God, which is a reissue by Lamb of God.
It's been a long time since I listened to that.
You wanted something shreddy, dude. That was why I was looking at it as soon as you said it.
That is not shreddy.
No, I know. So that was an album that came out last year, actually. It's getting kind of a, what do they call it?
Well, in that case, we can do Future Nostalgia next week because the Moonlight edition came out today. Calm down.
Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. I told you last week about the Evian ad, didn't I? I can't talk about that 2 weeks in a row. It's great. I just keep picking out more and more off her Evian ad. Right, sorry. Refocus. Let's go. Within each lies the other by As Everything Unfolds. Help Me, Help You by Stepson. To the End by Memoriam. And Bionic Swarm by Cryptosis. Do any of those tickle your fancy?
The only one of those that I'm particularly familiar with, I think you mentioned the band Citizen earlier.
I did. And
yeah, I've never listened to them, but I've heard of them, basically.
I had the same thing, and I didn't want to say it, right? Because I've heard of Citizen. I know I have, and I'm sure if I open up my music player now and type in Citizen and I put on a song, I'll be like, oh yeah, they do this one. But yeah, that caught my eye. Again, I've got this vague feeling that I've heard of Genghis Khan, but I'm not sure why. I might just be wishing that it's like an evil scarecrow type band. And I could be completely wrong about that.
I would be quite up for the Citizen record, I think. I get the feeling they're kind of an emo-y band. Maybe a post-hardcore shoegaze, which I'm all about. But
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd be up for that.
Fantastic. Well, there you go, folks. Next week, we will be listening to Life in Your Glass World by Citizen. Came out today.
Oh, yeah.
We will be up on Twitch next week talking about that. Right. Have you got anything else to say at this point? Anything you want to add in?
No, I think I'm all talked out. We've actually somehow managed to go longer than last week. So
I was writing out this script earlier, right? And I managed to cut it down at the beginning, which I thought was important. We didn't have to run through our bios this week. We got through that section quite well. I was looking at the clock, we spent like 10, 12 minutes on that rather than about 20, 30 last week before we actually got to the album. But I know when I was writing, I saw just how much I was writing. I'm like, oh boy. I don't know whether we're cutting down to 45 here today. So
absolutely not.
Hey man, we got things to talk about. It's an album that deserved getting into a little bit, and I'm glad that we did. If you missed any of our lengthy discussion or want to hear it again, we will have a recorded version of this going up on our YouTube channel on Sunday. And if you are watching that recorded version, we will be going live again next Friday at 8 p.m. GMT with another album. Shout out again